Reading the Times for Friday, February 7th, 2020. Muddled Democratic race hurdles to New Hampshire. The head of the Democratic National Committee on Thursday demanded a recanvass of the results in the troubled Iowa caucuses, plunging the party's presidential race into further disarray and raising the prospect that the outcome won't be known until after the Democrats vote in the New Hampshire primary next week. The Times analysis found the Iowa returns riddled with problems, with over 100 precincts reporting results that were internally inconsistent, missing data, or not possible under the complex rules of the Iowa caucuses. Asked if the muddled Iowa results made him question Mrs. Clinton's narrow win there 4 years ago, a victory that helped her ultimately fend off Mr. Sanders, the senator said, "I don't think anybody knows," before allowing that there is some supposition that we won the popular vote there in 2016. The senator did not respond to questions about whether he still had confidence in Mr. Perez, but his top advisor sought to tamp down the discord while making clear that Sanders' campaign remained wary of the party establishment. Trump hails acquittal and lashes out at his evil and corrupt opponents. President Trump claimed vindication for his acquittal on 2 articles of impeachment and thanked several lawmakers who helped him through the process. The president's angry performance was the diametrical opposite of how President Bill Clinton reacted to his own acquittal after a Senate impeachment trial in 1999. House Democrats indicated they will continue their investigation and subpoena John R. Bolton, the president's former national security advisor, while Senate Republicans moved to investigate Hunter Biden for his business dealings in Ukraine, while his father, former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr., was in office. Extortion, NY assails Trump administration over traveler programs. Who still maintains his business in New York and owns a luxury Aerie on Fifth Avenue has shot back most recently at a State of the Union address, criticizing New York City and its sanctuary city policies of not turning in undocumented immigrants suspected of crimes to ICE. He blamed that policy for the rape and murder of a 92-year-old woman by an undocumented immigrant in Queens. Stephen Choi, executive director of the New York Immigration Coalition, which fought for the law, said that although New York went further than other states in limiting federal immigration authorities' access to driving records, other states had also some form of data privacy protection in their laws. Despite President Trump's attempts to punish New Yorkers for passing its own laws and standing up to his xenophobic policies, New York will not back down, Ms. James said. After disasters, Puerto Ricans are left with $1.6 billion in unpaid insurance claims. More than 2 years after Hurricane Maria descended, destroying power poles, public buildings, homes, roads, and other infrastructure from one end of the island to the other, an estimated $1.6 billion in insurance claims, particularly high dollar claims filed by cities and condominium associations, remain unresolved. "We have settled 99% of our claims," he said, adding that the company policy does not allow him to discuss pending claims. Mr. Favre, the public adjuster accused in Mapfree's lawsuit of inflating claims, said the insurance companies that have contested his claims cannot explain why so many experts agree with his damage estimates. Chinese doctor silenced after warning of outbreak dies from coronavirus. Dr. Li had the misfortune to be infected during the fight against the novel coronavirus pneumonia epidemic, and all-out efforts to save him failed. The Wuhan City Center Hospital said on Weibo, the Chinese social media service. Dr. Li's death has also exposed a troubling aspect of the epidemic that goes unmentioned in official statistics: the numbers of doctors, nurses, and medical workers infected by the virus. Dr. Li's death appeared unlikely to inspire protest in Wuhan, which has been under lockdown for just over 2 weeks in an unprecedented effort to extinguish the epidemic. China tightens Wuhan lockdown in wartime battle with the coronavirus. The Chinese authorities resorted to increasingly extreme measures in Wuhan on Thursday to try to halt the spread of the deadly coronavirus, ordering house-to-house searches, rounding up the sick, and warehousing them in enormous quarantine centers. Word of the new restrictions arrived as people of Wuhan received an emotional gut punch from the news that a doctor who had warned of the outbreak in December and was silenced by the police for it had died from the coronavirus infection. The new measures were announced 2 weeks after China barred people from leaving Wuhan, then expanded the restriction to cities in the central province of Hubei, and now confines more than 50 million people, a containment of nearly unimaginable, a big containment. For the Irish, Varadkar may have won Brexit, but he lost the war at home. The Irish Nationalist Party, Sinn Fein, unexpectedly vaulted ahead of the two mainstream parties with 25% of the vote, compared with 23% for the opposition Fianna Gael and 20% for Fein Gael, in a poll released Monday by the Irish Times. Though Sinn Fein is historically identified by its links to the Irish Republican Army, a legacy it has never been able to shake with older Irish people. It has appealed to younger urban voters with robust policies to deal with the housing crisis, among them a pledge to build 100,000 homes in 5 years. The reason theatre is Irish unification, said Bobby McDonough, a former Irish ambassador to Britain. Scottish official quits amid reports that he messaged teen hundreds of times. Mr. Mackey, who was seen as a rising star in the Scottish National Party, said in a statement that he had behaved foolishly and apologized unreservedly to the boy and his family, according to the BBC. Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland and leader of the party, said on Thursday morning that she had accepted Mr. Metcalfe's resignation. The Scottish Sun first published an article on Wednesday, citing the boy's mother and detailing numerous messages reportedly sent by Mr. Mackay to the boy on Facebook, on Instagram, and by text message. Mr. Mackey, a father of two, came out as gay when he left his wife in 2013. After a series of messages, Mr. Mackey asked the boy's age, to which he confirmed he was just 16. Girl 5 is raped on grounds of U.S. Embassy in India, police say. A 5-year-old girl was raped by a neighbor on the grounds of the United States Embassy in India's capital, the police say on Thursday, reviving a debate about sexual violence against women and children in the country. The girl's father worked in a support staff role at the embassy, according to the police. Last year, 4 men accused of raping and killing a young woman near the southern city of Hyderabad were shot dead under a bridge by police officers who had taken them to the scene of the crime. How Europe turned into a perfect landscape for wildfires. In a hotter, drier, more flammable climate like here in the Mediterranean region, forests can die slowly from drought or they can go up in flames almost instantly, releasing all of the plant-warming carbon dioxide in their trunks and branches into the atmosphere. In 2019, intense heat and drought helped spread fires across roughly 1,300 square miles of the continent, a swath of scorched land 15% bigger than the decade's annual average, according to preliminary data issued in mid-January by the European Forest Fire Information System. The European Union described forest fires as a serious and increasing threat. Brazil judge dismisses charges against the journalist Glenn Greenwald. A federal judge in Brazil on Thursday dismissed criminal charges against the American journalist Glenn Greenwald, sparing him for now from being prosecuted for his role in the release of hacked cell phone messages that have embarrassed prosecutors and prominent officials. Judge Ricardo Leite said in a 10-page ruling that the criminal case against Mr. Greenwald could not move forward because he was shielded by a Supreme Court justice order issued in August that barred law enforcement officials from investigating the journalist's role in the hacking case. The judge allowed the case to go forward against the 6 other people who were charged alongside Mr. Greenwald on January 21st. Mr. Greenwald and his colleagues at The Intercept Brazil, an online news source, published a series of articles beginning in June that raised questions about the fairness of high-profile corruption prosecutions. White House confirms killing of terrorist leader in Yemen. The United States killed the leader of al-Qaeda's affiliate in Yemen, the White House confirmed on Thursday. The confirmation came about a week after the New York Times first reported that the United States believed it had killed Qassim al-Rimi, the al-Qaeda leader, in January after months of tracing him. Mr. al-Rimi, 41, among the few remaining Qaeda leaders whose terrorist pedigree traces to the era before the September 11, 2001 attacks. Finland plans to give all new parents the same leave. The reform will support all kinds of families and ensure equal leaves for children regardless of the form of the family, she said. The new government policy will apply to all parents, regardless of gender or whether the child's biological or adoptive parents, and parents can transfer up to 69 days of their own leave to the partner. Finland's parental leave policies are still not as generous as neighboring Sweden, where each parent can take up to 240 days paid leave. Who fights a pandemic besides coronavirus? An infodemic. Starting Thursday afternoon when Pinterest users searched for coronavirus, they get a link to a page of coronavirus mythbusters from the WHO. Since the virus hit, Ms. Kuzmanovic said she and her colleagues have been in regular contact with the world's biggest and most powerful disseminators of information, including Facebook, Twitter, and Google, as well as social media influencers around the globe. That are self-appointed experts, people working from anecdotes or making up wild claims to get traffic or notoriety, said Mr. Patterson of the WHO. The groundwork of the coordination around the coronavirus was laid 2 years ago when Mr. Patterson went to the WHO director, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, and suggested a full-blown effort to contain the social media titans to combat health misinformation. Google launched what it called an SOS alert, which directs people who search for coronavirus to news and other information from the WHO, including the organization's Twitter account. That was expanded Thursday to include information in not just English, but also French, Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, and Russian. What it's like to be quarantined on an island over coronavirus fears. Life in an immigration detention center on Australia's Christmas Island has been not as bad as David Fein feared. While some evacuees have said their conditions at the center were worse than they imagined, Mr. Huang said he personally found the quarantine bearable. For Mr. Huang and his family, their journey began on Sunday in the city of Xiangyang in Hubei province, about 3 hours away from Wuhan, the Chinese city hardest hit by the virus. Africa intertwined with China fears coronavirus outbreak. Ethiopian Airlines, Africa's biggest and most profitable carrier, is in the main gateway between China and Africa, shuttling up to 1,500 passengers each day between Addis Ababa and China on dozens of weekly flights. The Ethiopian carrier has continued operating its China routes, while many other international airlines, including African carriers like Kenya Airways, Egypt Air, and Morocco's Royal Air, have suspended flights to China. Leah Tadesi, Ethiopia's state minister of health, said the decision to continue flights to China came not from her ministry, but from a higher government level. But she denied there was any pressure from China. China begins testing an antiviral drug in coronavirus patients. A single case cannot determine whether a drug works, but a report on the Washington patient in the New England Journal of Medicine has nonetheless sparked excitement about the drug. 2 clinical trials will take place in Wuhan, China, the center of the outbreak. 500 patients will receive the drug, then the comparison groups will get a placebo, Mr. McKeel said. The company is now using that stockpile for the trials in China and for the individual patients like the one in Washington state, whose doctor sought special permission from the Food and Drug Administration for compassionate use so they could give him an unapproved drug. I keep hearing painful coughs. Life on quarantine cruise ship. Things were looking up on Thursday for the more than 2,000 passengers quarantined on a cruise ship in Yokohama, Japan. Meals were coming on a more regular schedule as Japanese health officials continued to screen 273 passengers who were potentially exposed to the virus. They said that 20 of the 102 tested so far had been found to be positive. The 2,600 passengers who disembarked for at least a few hours on Saturday did not display symptoms at the quarantine screening station, said Takehiro Hayamizu, an official at the Naha Public Health Office. Was U.S. wrong about attack that nearly started a war with Iran? Iraqi intelligence officials sent reports to the Americans in November and December, warning that ISIS intended to target K1, an Iraqi air base in Kirkuk province that is also used by American forces. An intelligence brief sent to United States officials on December 25th said that Islamic fighters were trying to gain ground northwest of K1. General Adnan said he had warned the Americans about the possibility of a rocket attack on K1 as recently as lunch the day of the attack, when the Iraqis had invited the American commanders at the base for security talks over chicken tikka, rice, and kebabs. The American attacks on Kataib Hezbollah on January 2nd and the drone attack that killed the Iranian and Iraqi military leaders at the Baghdad airport the next day led to widespread anger against the American presence in Iraq and a vote in Iraq's parliament to expel all American forces. Violence surges in wake of Trump's Mideast plan. At least 3 Palestinians were killed during clashes with Israeli security forces in the West Bank on Wednesday and Thursday, and an Israeli soldier was seriously wounded in a car ramming in Jerusalem on Thursday, in a surge of violence following the release of the long-awaited and highly contentious American plan for a Mideast peace. Among the 3 Palestinians were a Palestinian Authority police officer and a police cadet. As one attack appeared to trigger the next, an Israeli soldier was lightly wounded on Thursday afternoon north of Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. On Wednesday, Mohammed al-Haddad, 17, was killed by a shot in the chest, doctors say, as youths clashed with Israeli forces in the volatile Palestinian city of Hebron on the southern West Bank. The Israeli military said the confrontation came after days of clashes in Hebron, with Palestinians throwing stones and firebombs at forces near the Jewish settlement at the heart of the city. Thousands of miles from Wuhan, a U.S. city, is shaken by the coronavirus. It's a small world after all, a frightening thought if the virus became a global pandemic, but a mixed blessing for the scores of Wuhan natives living in Pittsburgh, which has been a sister city of Wuhan for nearly 40 years. Wuhan is a much bigger city than Pittsburgh, but the two bear a certain resemblance. In an interview, Mayor Bill Peduto of Pittsburgh called Wuhan a post-industrial city that has created a new economy based upon technology and medicine. Both are former steel cities at the confluence of major rivers, as Pittsburgh had decades ago. Wuhan has recently taken on the heavy task of cleaning up and reinventing itself. Natives of Wuhan in Pittsburgh, many of whom are friends with the doctors now in Wuhan hospitals, heard dire reports. Federal hate crime charges filed in El Paso shooting that targeted Latinos. The suspect in last summer's mass shooting at an El Paso Walmart is expected to face federal hate crime charges alleging that the 21-year-old former college student targeted Hispanics in a racially motivated massacre that left 22 people dead, according to a person briefed on the case. The charges against the suspect were set to be unveiled weeks after Jay Tabb, the head of national security for the FBI, said at an event in Washington that the Bureau had a significant increase in racially motivated violent extremism in the United States, and I think growing increase in white nationalism and white supremacy extremist movements. Last summer, the Justice Department also identified and disrupted 3 white supremacist domestic terrorists who were members of a group called The Base, which seeks to spark a race war and create a white ethno-state. Bloomberg pursues wealthy donors, but not their checkbooks. Jason Schechter, Mr. Bloomberg's communication director, said the campaign saw the Committee for Mike as an opportunity to mobilize prominent people in support of Mr. Bloomberg's across all communities, in support for Mr. Bloomberg, across all communities, including leaders of industry, philanthropy, community activism, clergy, arts, and sports. While people who are raising money for other candidates say they have been invited to Mr. Bloomberg's events, no one said Mr. Bloomberg's aides had actively discouraged them from continuing to help other candidates at the same time. Some private events have been headlined by Democratic officials supportive of Mr. Bloomberg's campaign, including former Mayor Michael Nutter of Philadelphia and 2 California mayors, Michael Tubbs of Stockton and Sam Liccardo of San Jose. In his own appearance, Mr. Bloomberg has stressed the importance of defeating President Trump and argued that the best way for Democrats to do that is with a campaign aimed at the political middle. Sanders raises $25 million in January, a huge show of financial strength. The Sanders campaign also announced that it received 1.3 million donations in January and that more than 1.5 million different individuals had donated over the course of the campaign. Working class Americans giving $18 at a time are putting our campaign in a strong position to compete in states all over the map, said Faiz Shakir, Mr. Sanders' campaign manager, in a statement. Miss Warren campaign manager Roger Lau responded by pointing out what he called a fun fact about how some campaigns exploit our broken campaign financial laws, suggesting that if Mr. Howell had written that message in private to a super PAC, it could constitute illegal coordination with an outside group. Navy Secretary pushed out by Trump says he'll endorse Bloomberg. The Navy Secretary, ousted by President Trump, said Thursday that he would endorse Michael R. Bloomberg for president, a high-profile defection that Mr. Bloomberg's allies hope will convince Democratic voters that their best chance of defeating Mr. Trump is a former mayor of New York, Richard V. Spencer, who was ousted as Navy Secretary in November after he publicly disagreed with Mr. Trump's intervention in an extraordinary war crimes case involving a member of the Navy SEALs, is a lifelong Republican. The endorsement of Mr. Spencer is significant because, as a former Trump political appointee, he is the embodiment of what many view as Mr. Bloomberg's greatest potential asset. The candidate can make inroads with Republican voters in November's general election. Mr. Bloomberg derided Mr. Trump as a lawless leader and quoted Mr. Spencer's resignation letter. The battle for California's 20 million voters came early this year. Just as in other Super Tuesday states, Michael Bloomberg is spending lavishly to get on the airwaves here, so far paying nearly $34 million to advertise on television across the state, including roughly $1.8 million on Spanish-language stations, according to advertising analytics. Mr. Sanders' campaign has spent roughly $3 million on television campaigns. California plans Mr. Sanders' campaign has spent roughly $3 million on television in California so far, and has said it plans to spend over $2.5 million more, spread between California and Texas, another delegate-rich Super Tuesday state. In some ways, the campaign's California plans seem to echo the fishhook strategy Republicans tried to use in the state decades ago, targeting the central region of the state and inland Southern California, said Karthik Ramakishnan, a professor of public policy and politics at the University of California, Riverside. Iowa caucus results riddled with errors and inconsistencies. In at least a few cases, the Iowa Democratic Party's reported results do not match those reported by the precincts. Many of these cases could be simple tabulation mistakes in a precinct caucus that otherwise went smoothly, like a West Des Moines precinct that reported the first alignment results only for the non-viable candidates, but still reported final alignment results for the viable ones. The Times is continuing to report the Iowa Democratic Caucus results as released by the party and has alerted the party to an extensive list of precinct errors. Democrats knocked back by Trump's acquittal ponder their next steps. House Democrats, back on their heels after President Trump's acquittal of impeachment charges, wrestled on Thursday with a question that could determine their party's fate in November. Now what? Some of the Democrats' long-running investigations into Mr. Trump are continuing quietly, and others are proceeding in the federal courts, where the House is party to a handful of consequential legal fights over access to Mr. Trump's tax returns, other financial information, and witness testimony and documents related to Robert S. Mueller III's Russia investigation. If Democrats were to win access, say, to Mr. Trump's federal tax return, or a court forced Donald F. McGahn II, the former White House counsel, to testify about Mr. Trump's attempts to thwart the Russian investigation, it could produce a new round of high-profile hearings about whether the president had broken the law, an inquiry that would surely reverberate in the presidential campaign. "We've been through hell," said the president, victorious. Mr. Romney, who on Wednesday became the first Republican senator in American history to vote for the removal of a president of his own party from office, presented on Tuesday the only remaining wild card in an otherwise certain impeachment vote scheduled for the next day. Mr. Romney chatted warmly with his colleagues and seatmate, Senator Lamar Alexander, Republican of Tennessee, who a few days earlier said he would vote to acquit the president on both the impeachment counts. Representative Lou Gohmert, the rabble-rousing Republican of Texas, shared a big hug with Senator Joni Ernst, Republican of Iowa, who a few days earlier had suggested the Republicans might move swiftly to impeach a future president, Joseph R. Biden, the Jr., who might move swiftly to impeach a future president, Joseph R. Biden, Jr. She later said in her remarks, "We're taking it entirely out of context," but whatever. Let's finish this up. Trump's team celebrates acquittal at where else? His Washington hotel. 1 mile from the scene of President Trump's acquittal at his impeachment trial, members of his defense team, family, and administration gathered Wednesday evening at the Trump International Hotel in downtown Washington. Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, arrived early for the evening, ducking into a side room. For a moment. Ducking into a with members of Mr. Trump's legal defense team, including Pat A. Cipollone and Jay Sekulow. Mr. Bowling echoed some supporters by focusing on Senator Mitt Romney's Republican of Utah, who voted to remove the president from office. Mr. Mitt Romney, Republican of Utah, who voted to remove the president from office, prevent Mr. Trump from being able to say his acquittal had been cast along purely party lines. Senate report criticizes response to Russian meddling and blames partisanship. Republican congressional leaders' refusal to publicly acknowledge Russian election interference in 2016 contributed to a watered-down response by the Obama administration in the midst of the presidential campaign, a Senate report released Thursday found. According to the report, numerous Obama administration officials said some members of Congress at the September 2016 briefing resisted the administration request that a bipartisan statement be made regarding Russia being responsible for the interference activities. It was at the briefing where Mr. McConnell told Ms. Monaco that she should be careful with intelligence. Mr. Obama warned Mr. Putin in a note that the kind of consequences that he could anticipate would be powerfully impactful to their economy and far exceeding anything that he has seen to date, the report said, citing an interview with Susan E. Rice, Mr. Obama's national security advisor at the time. After acquittal, Trump repeats inaccurate claims on impeachment and Ukraine. On Thursday, Mr. Trump took the particular umbrage at one of Mr. Schiff's erroneous lines in the parody. By the way, don't call me again. I'll call you when you've done what I've asked. According to the reconstructed transcript of the call, Mr. Trump said the opposite to Mr. Zelensky. Whenever you would like to come to the White House, feel free to call. As Mr. Trump praised Senator Charles E. Grassley, Republican of Iowa, he claimed that Mr. Grassley's questioning of James B. Comey, the former FBI director, in May 2017, resulted in Mr. Comey confessing to the misdeeds Mr. Trump had so long accused him of. Senator Mitt Romney of Utah won in 2012, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky in 2013, 14, and 15, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas in 2016. CPAC retired the poll for 2017 and 18, but Mr. Trump did come in first place in 2019 with 82% of the votes, with Mitt Romney trailing at second at 6%. What was that? How Mitch McConnell delivered acquittal for Trump. Mr. McConnell set out to create the framework for the trial that his members could get behind, that could withstand the possibility of compromising new information emerging, and that would deliver the White House a quick but credible verdict of not guilty. It went far from perfect for Republicans. Among other setbacks, Senator Mitt Romney, Republican of Utah, voted guilty on the charge of abuse of power, depriving Mr. Trump of the ability of absolute party loyalty he coveted. But Mr. McConnell reached his desired end. In November, Mr. McConnell began sharing with Republicans his fears that votes to allow witnesses could create messy inter-party disputes with the White House that would prolong the trial for weeks or more without changing the outcome. 4 senators had expressed enough qualms about the president to give him leverage to win concessions from Mr. McConnell. Mitt Romney of Utah, the 2012 presidential nominee, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who had in the past bucked Mr. McConnell and the White House, Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, a veteran politician with plans to retire, and Susan Collins of Maine, a centrist facing the re-election challenge of her career. Freeze on global entry enrollment for New Yorkers. What we know. The Department of Homeland Security said Wednesday that it would temporarily block New Yorkers from enrolling in the Trusted Travelers Program, including Globe Entry, which allows pre-screened travelers to bypass lengthy lines at airports and border crossings. Yes, are a number of Trusted Traveler programs affected by the suspension, including Global Entry, Nexus, Sentry, and FAST. In a 3-page letter announcing the suspension, Homeland Security Acting Secretary Chad F. Wolf wrote that New Yorkers would no longer be able to enroll or re-enroll in those expedited traveler programs. Kenneth T. Cuccinelli, the acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, said on Thursday that approximately 175,000 New Yorkers currently enrolled in programs who need to renew this year will be cut off by the end of 2020. He said that 50,000 New Yorkers who are in the middle of the application process but have not yet received final approval would also immediately lose the opportunity. What it's like to be the face of Trump's Super Bowl ad. The ad featuring Miss Johnson was made by the Trump campaign last year. Miss Johnson said she was aware of some backlash to the Super Bowl advertisement, with critics calling it a political play aimed at papering over Mr. Trump's record on race. Miss Johnson would not say whether she would vote for Mr. Trump if she could. Trump opens National Monument land to energy exploration. The Interior Department's release of a formal land use blueprint for the approximately 861,974 acres of land will allow oil, gas, and coal companies to complete the legal process for leasing mines and wells on land that had once been part of Utah's Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, established by President Bill Clinton. The approved plans keep the commitment of the administration to the families and communities of Utah that know and love this land the best and will take care of those resources for many generations to come, said Casey Hammond, the Interior Department's acting Assistant Secretary for Land and Minerals Management. To date, no oil, gas, or coal companies have taken any of the legal first steps required to mine or drill on the land, although they could have done so at any time in the months following Mr. Trump's proclamation that he was removing protection from the land. A spokeswoman for the Interior Department said. Years of safety disputes inside the company that flew Kobe Bryant. In the years before the helicopter crash that killed the basketball legend Kobe Bryant and 8 other people, the company operating the aircraft, Island Express Helicopters, had a series of disputes over its safety practices, according to federal accident reports and a former federal safety inspector. Tensions over the company's safety culture simmered even after 2008 crash. Even after the 2008 crash, as the company came under new management several years later, according to people involved in discussions. As recently as 2017, Kurt Dietz, a pilot and former safety manager at Island Express, resigned from his safety responsibilities, he said, over differences of opinion about how the company's safety management system should be run. You from New York, you're first on Trump's revenge list. In a letter to top officials at New York's Department of Motor Vehicles, the acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, said the move was in response to a 2019 state law enabling undocumented immigrants to obtain driver's licenses. Barring access to these critical records, Mr. Wolf warned, undermines ICE's objective of protecting the people of New York from menacing threats to national security and public safety. He said that New York's lack of cooperation hinders federal agents' ability to confirm whether an individual applying to Trusted Travelers Program membership is eligible for its benefits. Despite President Trump's attempts to punish New Yorkers for passing its own laws and standing up to his xenophobic policies, New Yorkers will not back down, she declared, vowing to defend New York's laws against the president's vindictive actions. Thank you, Iowa. As Iowa Democrats struggle to tally votes and claw their way out of the rubble of Monday's caucus crackup, there continues to be angst and outrage about the damage that the Hawkeye state has inflicted on the democratic process. The current debate over how much weight to give the Iowa weakness of Mr. Biden, who has held a comfortable lead among minority voters for its entire race, should not be happening. After the 2016 kerfuffle, in which Hillary Clinton's razor-thin win left Mr. Sanders supporters complaining about lack of transparency, Iowa, in a panicked effort to save the process, vowed to make it more transparent by reporting out more of the raw data. The triumph of fiscal hypocrisy. Let's go back for a minute to early 2009, when the economy was imploding and desperately needed help in the form of deficit spending. The corporate tax cuts that were the biggest driver of rising deficits did nothing to increase business investment, which has actually declined over the past year. Still, Trump's deficits have given the economy and Trump's political fortunes a a lift in the short term. How Trump wins again. In 2016, in Pennsylvania, 117,000 Sanders primary voters went for Trump in the general, and Trump won the state by 44,292 ballots. In Michigan, 48,000 Sanders voters went for Trump, and Trump won the state by 10,704. In Wisconsin, 51,300 Sanders voters went for Trump, and Trump won the state by 22,748. Who says it's not safe to travel to China? The coronavirus outbreak seems defined by two opposing forces: the astonishing efficiency with which the travel industry connects the world and a political moment dominated by xenophobic rhetoric and the building of walls. The world often thinks of travel and tourism as being a collection of different industries operating separately yet alongside one another. With the rhetoric surrounding coronavirus, as it appears the astonishing growth of the Chinese travel market in the past 15 years did little to rid the industry of the impulse to treat Chinese travelers as others in the face of doubt and uncertainty. Mikey Bloomby, fixing inequality is my priority. We tax incomes from stocks and bonds at much lower rate than income from work. Under my plan, the tax burden on the middle class work won't increase, but those earning more than $1 million a year, capital gains will be taxed as ordinary income. Like them, I'll wear the label as a badge of honor, and I'll use the new tax revenue, an estimated $5 trillion over 10 years, to invest in America in ways that reduce inequality, strengthen the middle class, and restore faith in the promise of the American dream. Trump's acquittal and Romney's courage. The most consequential accomplishments of the impeachment effort, I think, is that it did exactly what President Trump tried to do by pressuring the president of Ukraine. Let me suggest to the Democrats that the time has come to put aside your hatred of President Trump. President Trump is a self-centered bully and a liar who has no regard for propriety, morality, truth, scientific facts, or the conventions that make our democracy work. Mitt Romney's Spartacus moment and Kirk Douglas's death. I see a synchronicity between the death of the storied actor Kirk Douglas and the abasement of a once principled political party, the GOP. In the 1960s film Spartacus, a glorious epic about an ex-gladiator who led a slave revolt against Rome, the dramatic climax occurs when Crassus, the victorious Roman commander, issues a bleak choice to the defeated remnants of Spartacus's army. All survivors will be crucified unless they surrender the person or the body of this Spartacus. Cleft-chin Kirk Douglas, who plays Spartacus, rises, hoping to spare his comrades from crucifixion. Of 53 GOP senators, only Mitt Romney dared to embrace what could have been the Republicans' Spartacus moment. Michelle Phillips, Caribbean Dreamin'. Exploiting recent anti-Semitic attacks to push for the repeal of important criminal justice reform is shameful, dangerous, and misguided. In Tiffany Harris's case, the alleged assault on 3 Orthodox Jewish women occurred before Miss Harris was released without bail and before New York's bail reform went into effect. Rolling back criminal justice reform to protect Jewish communities sends a false message that preserving a racist criminal justice system will combat anti-Semitism. Broker fee ban. Renters are jubilant, but agents are reeling. Some renters hire a broker themselves to help them find an apartment. Those brokers would still be allowed to charge tenants a fee. Tenants would avoid paying a large one-time broker fee over time. They could end up paying more. Instead of just paying when they move in, tenants could face paying a higher rent when the broker's fees are baked in, even after a tenant renews a lease. Jed Wilder, a real estate broker at Compass, said that when brokers collect fees from a landlord, not a tenant, an atypical arrangement in New York, the fees are usually no more than 1 month's rent. Key questions in Weinstein trial. Do you believe the woman? The prosecution rested the case against Mr. Weinstein on Thursday after graphic first-person testimony from 6 women who said the producer had sexually assaulted them. At the heart of the criminal indictment are allegations made by two women, Miriam Haley, a former production assistant, who said the producer forced oral sex on her inside of his home in 2006, and Jessica Mann, a former actress, who accused him of raping her in a Midtown Manhattan hotel in 2003. Mr. Weinstein had pleaded not guilty in state Supreme Court in Manhattan to 5 felony counts, including criminal sexual assault, rape, and predatory sexual assault. The women's accounts shared several similarities. Mr. Weinstein allegedly lured them to his home or a hotel room with the promise of an acting role or job, then cornered them into a bedroom or bathroom, demanded that they undress even as they protested, and coerced them into a sexual act using physical and verbal intimidation. After 6 years in office, New York mayor vows to save our city. A call to save our city might make more sense as a campaign slogan for a newcomer running for office in a city in steep decline, rather than a theme for a mayor on his 7th year in office, presiding over a booming New York. Yet Mayor Bill de Blasio embraced this message in his State of the City's speech on Thursday, laying out a series of plans to help calm New Yorkers' growing anxieties. New York City is the greatest city in the world, but many New Yorkers have real fears that the city they love is slipping away, the mayor said. Some of the mayor's rivals questioned his theme of saving New York City. If there's anything we need saving from, it's the city's part-time focus on our full-time affordability crisis, said Scott M. Stringer, the city's comptroller, who was running for mayor in 2021 and recently unveiled his own affordable housing proposal. Police chief made fiery claim over MS-13 murders. Records disputed. According to court documents, Mr. Rodriguez's identity was under protective order starting December 2018. That order was modified in December 2019 to allow prosecutors to share investigative information with defense lawyers. On December 10, 2019, Judge Helene F. Gergerty ordered prosecutors to begin producing their investigative material to the defensive teams, who were forbidden to disclose any of the information, including Mr. Rodriguez's name, to their clients before January 6. When the parties arrived in court on January 6, 2020, Nassau County prosecutors said they were not prepared for trial and requested the date be moved. A county prosecutor agreed to allow defense lawyers to share certain discovery information with their clients, but specifically asked that any witnesses' names, like Mr. Rodriguez, not be shared. Fantasy sports contests are illegal gambling, New York Appeals Court rules. A New York State Appeals Court on Thursday struck down most of a law that authorized fantasy sports in the state, dealing a setback to companies like FanDuel and DraftKings in one of their most lucrative markets. The law signed by Governor Andrew M. Cuomo on August 2016 declared that fantasy sports did not constitute gambling and provided for consumer safeguards, minimum standards, and registration, regulation, and taxation of daily fantasy sports providers. Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association, an industry group, estimates that 59 million people play fantasy sports in the United States and Canada in 2017, more than double the 27 million who played in 2009. As coronavirus spreads, face mask makers go into overdrive. We're making masks as fast as we can, said Guillaume Laverdeux, the chief operating officer of Colmy Hoppins Parent Company, Canada-based Medicom, as forklift drivers moved boxes of freshly finished masks into waiting trucks. Demand is especially strong for high-filtration respiratory masks, which can be more effective against the spread of virus-laden droplets than surgical masks, Mr. Laverdeux said. 5 machines made surgical masks, the thin rectangular pads that cover the nose and mouth, while other machines pieced together the more rugged respiratory masks. Boeing refuses to cooperate with new inquiry into deadly crash. The legislators initiated the review in the wake of a New York Times examination of evidence from a 2009 crash that found that Dutch safety authorities had either removed or played down some criticisms of Boeing in their accident report after pushback from an American team that included the manufacturer and officials from the NTSB and the Federal Aviation Administration. Jan Paternotte, a Dutch lawmaker, expressed frustration at Boeing's refusal to attend the hearing on Thursday and likened the decision to the company's missteps after the recent crashes of the 737 MAX, which killed 346 people, plunged Boeing into the biggest crisis in its history, and shook the international confidence in the manufacturer and its American regulators. At the hearing, Gerion Disembleon, who leads the Dutch Safety Board, acknowledged that there can be greater transparency around the source of information in its investigations, but said the board had nonetheless acted independently and that Boeing had not escaped blame. OneWeb launches 34 satellites as astronomers fear radio chatter. During a few hours in orbit, the satellites were steadily deployed and began to build the company's constellation, which will ultimately include 650 operational satellites, enough to provide high-speed broadband internet to every corner of the globe by the end of 2021, OneWeb hopes. The beam sent back to Earth by SpaceX's satellites are a little less than 30 miles wide, as the company plans to use many satellites to achieve global coverage. While radio astronomers are figuring out the impact of satellite constellations on their work, optical astronomers are already tracking satellite streaks in their field of view. The New York Times tops 5 million subscriptions as ads decline. The company's stated goal is to reach 10 million by 2025. The 5,251,000 total subscriptions include customers who receive ink and paper editions on their doorstep and driveways, and the close to 3.5 million who are digital-only customers for the core news product, the company said. The price of its shares rose nearly 13% in trading on Thursday, closing at $38.55. In a statement, Mark Thompson, the Times Company president and chief executive, called 2019 a record-setting year for the New York Times digital subscription business, the best since the company launched digital subscriptions almost 9 years ago. The company attributed the drop in digital ad revenue to an unusually strong finish in 2018. The company said it expected to continue generating revenue more from readers than from advertisers that were once integral to the newspaper business. Uber posts faster growth but loses $1.1 billion. The results were driven by growth in Uber's main ride-hailing business, with the number of trips rising 28% to more than 1.9 billion, and revenue increasing 27% to more than 3 billion. In contrast, Uber's food delivery business, called Uber Eats, lost 461 million on revenue of 734 million. Mr. Khosrow said Uber is aiming to make an operating profit by 2021. Clearly, Uber has put out somewhat aggressive timelines for profitability, said Tom White, a senior equity analyst at D.A. Davidson. Gail King faults CBS for promoting interview questions about Kobe Bryant. Gail King criticized CBS on Thursday for how it promoted a recent interview that touched on Kobe Bryant, an unusually public rebuke from one of the most powerful figures in the network's news division. Miss Winfrey ultimately abandoned the project, which went on to be well received by critics at the Sundance Film Festival and has been picked up by HBO Max. Miss King, one of the most powerful people at CBS News, is the lead anchor of its weekday morning show, which earns by far more than any other program at the network's news division. CBS News started a new chapter last year, appointing Susan Zirinsky as the news division's president, naming Nora O'Donnell as the anchor of CBS Evening News, and overhauling the morning show, with Miss King serving as its centerpiece. urban legend or authentic Trump autograph. Either way, it sells. Since President Trump took office, the signed objects have landed there, including a book inscribed with "Dear Carol, I will never change the hair." A recall Newsweek pronouncing Hillary Clinton Madame President, and Mr. Trump's sketch of a New York City skyline. Mr. Golden revealed that it belonged to Aaron Osthoff, who had previously worked with Jonathan to procure an oath of office that Mr. Trump signed. Even though the impeachment report was signed on a diagonal, he never goes outside the square, nor does the pen interfere with the title. Impeachment of Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. U.S. to start trade talks with Kenya to counter China's influence. Kenya is the United States' 98th largest trading partner in goods, with $1 billion in two-way trade in 2018, according to the Office of the United States Trade Representative. Robert Lighthouser, the United States Trade Representative, said in a statement that Kenya was an important strategic partner to the United States, and there's an enormous potential for us to deepen our economic and commercial ties. The administration believes that an agreement with Kenya will receive broad bipartisan support in Congress, he added. In May, the African Union initiated the African Continental Free Trade Area, a deal aimed at breaking down the trade barriers and minimizing trade disputes. Casper, the mattress startup, goes through with lackluster IPO. While investors continue to enthusiastically buy shares in the tech industry's biggest companies, they have been skeptical of young companies that are losing money. Public market investors have shown more interest in profitable companies serving other businesses like Zoom Video Communications, a teleconferencing company, and TradeWeb, an electronic trading platform. The chain invested in the company instead. But as Casper grew, competitors saw an easy opportunity and rushed in, with an average of one new bed-in-the-box companies launching per week between 2015 and 2018. Wearable tech that tells drowsy truckers it's time to pull over. Fatigue comes with the job of driving an 18-wheeler, even with rules requiring rest stops and limiting driving hours. The industry, which employs 3.5 million people in the United States, has been focused on a new law requiring the installation of electronic logging devices on most commercial trucks that is meant to help ensure drivers don't drive more than the legally allotted hours in a day and that they take required breaks. The system can then discern whether a driver is driving at an unsafe speed or perhaps just passing someone, going down a hill, or crossing a highway overpass that runs above a surface street with a lower speed limit. Elliott Management is said to push for changes at SoftBank. Elliott Management, the $40.2 billion hedge fund run by Paul E. Singer, has taken a $2.5 billion stake in SoftBank and has been urging changes at the company. Three people familiar with the matter said on Thursday. In his statement, Elliott said the firm's substantial investment in SoftBank reflects a strong conviction that the market significantly undervalues SoftBank's portfolio of assets. Mr. Sun has taken part, as has SoftBank's chief financial officer, Yoshimitsu Goto, and the head of the Vision Fund, Rajiv Misra. China's dominance of 5G networks puts a U.S. economic future at stake, Barr warns. The White House and the American national security experts have said the companies, including Huawei, are too closely tied to the Chinese government, and that their equipment could give Chinese officials unlawful access to data and communications if networks across the world decided to use it. The Trump administration has taken an inconsistent approach towards Huawei and ZTE, and those companies continue to play an essential role in the new 5G telecom networks being built around the globe. The Trump administration has asked allies not to use equipment made by Huawei, in some cases threatening to withhold intelligence from countries that do not ban the company. China cuts tariffs on $75 billion in U.S. goods. That was the easy part. China on Thursday said it would reduce tariffs on $75 billion worth of American-made goods, a step that signals the intention to hold up its end of trade truce with President Trump, despite the coronavirus crisis unfolding largely within its borders. The United States agreed to reduce tariffs on $120 billion worth of Chinese-made goods as a part of that deal, and on Thursday, China reciprocated. The trade truce left in place most of the new and increased tariffs on $360 billion in Chinese-made goods that Mr. Trump began enacting in 2018, setting off the trade war between the two economic heavyweights. And that has been Reading the Times for Friday, February 7th, 2020.